Hi everyone, Sinan this side, and in this video what we are going to see is how to make a character animation and character movement in Godot for a 2D platformer game. So before we get started, if you want to follow along, all the resources and assets would be in the description below. I would provide the link on where you can actually access them. Anyways, let's get started. So we want to have a player movement, and for a player movement we need to have a player scene, and so let's make one. So for a player scene, what I'll do is I'll create on this plus, Control A, or I can use this other node to search for character body 2D. So which is going to be our player. So if I select this, I would have a 2D scene, and let's just rename this to player. Okay. Now for this player, we would need to have a couple of things. One is the sprite 2D as well as a collision shape 2D. And for the sprite, I would for the sprite, I would take this icon as my texture, and we would see this Godot symbol. Now if I press F, this would center everything. And for the collision shape, let's take a rectangle shape 2D. Now if I zoom in a bit using the scroll up on my mouse, I can press Alt and select a corner, and if I drag this, it would uniformly scale this in all the directions. So let's make this fit the whole sprite. Okay, so now we have a collision shape, so it can actually collide with rigid bodies and static bodies, as well as we have a sprite to see that this is our player. Later on, we are going to change the sprite to an animated sprite 2D, so this is good enough. Okay. Now to test our scene, we need to have a level. Now before creating a level scene, what I would do is save this scene, go into the scenes folder and save this as a player.tscene. Fine. After this, let's create the level scene. So add a new scene, and let's use this 2D scene, and I'll just rename this to level. Okay, so we have a level scene, we have a player scene, and let's just save this, Ctrl+S, and again save this as level.tscn. Fine. Now what we want is to have our player inside this level. So what I'll do is select this level node, I'll click on instantiate or Ctrl+Shift+A, and I could choose this player scene, and this would get our player into this level scene. So any changes made here would be reflected in this level scene. And for this player, I want to have a camera that always follows it. So what I'll do is I'll add a camera 2D, and that would follow the player by making this camera 2D as a child of the player. So if I press Ctrl+S to save, and if I take this character and place it in the center of the screen before we actually run this game, what I would like to do is to go to project settings, and go into this window and change this to 1920 to 1080 and window to full screen, and then you can just close this. Now this is not important, but I like the way that I am seeing the game. Okay, so if I press play, it would again ask there is no main scene selected, so select current, and now this would run our game. And now you can see that our player is in the center of the screen. It's not moving, it's not falling, it's just there. So what I would do is I'll press Alt F4 to close this window, and let's see this. What is happening? Why is our player not moving? Now to move our player, we need to attach a script to it which has a function move and slide or move and collide. So let's add that. Now if I go to player and select this player, and if I click on this button which attaches a script to our player, and you would get this pop-up. Now I would use this classic template, and I would save this in my scripts folder, and yep, now I would press create, and we would have a sample template. Now the code is quite small, so I'll press Ctrl and plus the plus button, so that will actually increase or zoom in. And if you observe, there are some issues. First, the text is going beyond the visible area. So there are two ways to handle this. One is you can press this distraction free mode, which would give you a bigger area to work with. Or what you could do is press Alt+Z, click on this screen, press Alt+Z, and that would actually wrap the text in this given window. Okay, so let's go with the previous one with the distraction free mode, and yep, let's see what has happened. So for moving a player or a character body 2D, you need a physics process, and in this physics process this is giving us the basic movement. First, if the player is not on the floor, you'll add some gravity to it, so you're trying to pull this character down. Next is if input is action just press is UI accept. This is basically for our jump animation and it is on floor. So you can only jump when you're on floor. So if that is the case, you will update your velocity to this jump velocity. And now get access. Now this is an interesting function. What this would do is for this left key and the right key, it would give you a value from -1 to +1 and every number in between to get the intensity of how strongly the player is actually pressing the keys. But since you're using a laptop, this won't make a difference. It will only give you values between, or not between, it would only give you -1, +1 and 0. Let's say, but if you're using an Xbox controller, you would have more values in between as well. So the intensity of the player is also captured here. Anyways, so if you press UI left, this direction would have a value -1. If you press UI dot right, this would give you a direction of +1. And if you don't press anything or you press both of them, you would get a direction as 0. So that means if I have a direction that is -1 or +1, I would try to update the velocity of my player in the X direction. Otherwise, if my direction is 0, that means I'm not clicking any left or right key. I want to stop the player. So for stopping, I would make use of this move toward function, which would take the velocity of X down to 0 at this speed. Okay. And in the end, I would call move and slide. This move and slide function is actually for implementing the gravity. Now, if I save this and if I actually run this game, you won't see a difference. The player is still in the center, but that is not what is happening. This player is actually falling down and we are not able to see that because we have a camera directly attached with this player, and so we are not able to actually see the player falling. So I'll close this, and what I'll do is to actually see this in effect. I'll go to this level scene and I'll remove this distraction free mode. I'll select the camera, and for position smoothing I would enable this. And now if I save and run this, you would actually see the player falling, and this is what you're seeing. Now the player is going way beyond the camera or the scene is because the camera is following at a bit of a lag. And if you see the player script, when you are not on floor, you're updating the velocity in this Y direction. That means you're increasing the velocity that is going down. So camera is always lagging behind. But to see some collisions, what I would do is I'll go to this level scene and I would instantiate a couple of nodes, which is a static body 2D, and this would need a collision shape 2D, and I would drag this inside this. Now for this collision shape, what I would do is I would take this rectangle, I zoom out, select this node, I'll drag it out and place it just below the player. Now I can save this, and if I run this, you'll see the player going down and then stopping because it is actually colliding with something. Now to see that in action, go to debug and click on visible collision shapes. And now if you run this scene, you would actually see the collision happening. So this is the collision shape. And now if I press left or right, or basically right or left, I can actually move around. And if I press the spacebar, I am actually able to jump. So that's good enough. Let's close this. And what we would be doing is going into project settings and going into this input map. Now we want to assign our own keys to the player. That means we want to modify the keys that are associated with an action. So we would have, let's say for this tutorial, we would have 3 actions. One is the left, then you click add, and similarly I would have a right and a jump, and I would add that. Now for this left, I would select this left and I'll click on this plus, and I would click the left arrow key and press OK. Again, I'll click on this plus, I'll press A and OK. Similarly for right, I would click on this plus, press right arrow key, OK. And if I press this, and if I press this plus again, I could add D to my actions as well. Okay. For this jump, I could have 3 keys. One is the up arrow key, one is the W, and one is the spacebar itself. And click OK. So you have this input map, and let's attach these actions to our script. So if I go into this player and script, you see this is UI accept. In place of UI accept, I would just write jump. In this UI left, I would press left, UI right, I would just write right. And if I save this, this would be working fine. So I can move left, move right, and with the up arrow key I can jump, with the space I can jump, and with the W I can jump as well. So this is working. Now let's just expand this, and what I would do is take all of this code and I'll cut this, and what I'll do, I'll create a new function basic movement, and in this I would just paste all of the code. And you see there is an issue. We need a delta as well, which is provided in this physics process but not in the basic movement. So I can just pass that as an argument. This would be a float, and this function is actually going to return a void type. That means it's not going to return anything. I can minimize this and I can add that to my physics process. Now if I save this and if I try to run this, we would have the same movement as we had. Okay, what's next? The next thing is we need to do some changes, and I'll close this distraction free mode, and I would like to show you some changes that I like to do. Now you see this jump speed, so I want this to be lowercase first of all. So speed, I'll copy this, Control C, and wherever there is speed I would just update this to lowercase, and then rather than having a constant I'll do at export var speed. Now what this does is this takes this variable speed and places this in the expector menu. So I can manually change this by dragging and dropping, and I don't have to manually edit the script every time. And similarly I'll do for this jump velocity as well, and let's just use this jump velocity, select this, Control C and Control V, and save this. Now everything is working fine. Okay, so now we have a level. If you go to the 2D panel, we have a level. We have our player which can move, which can jump on the basis of the keys that we provided. Now what's next? What's next is actually providing the character animation, the movement, going left and going right. So I'll go to this player, I'll take the sprite 2D and I would delete this, and I would do okay. Now for this what I would do is add another node which is AnimatedSprite 2D. Now for this I would need to have a sprite frames. So when I click on this AnimatedSprite 2D, I would see this in the inspector panel. I would click on this and click on new sprite frames. Okay, now when you click on the sprite frames again, you would see a panel on the bottom window. Okay, so now for this I would like to have 4 animations. First one is the run, second one is the idle animation, the third one is the jump animation, and the final one is actually the glide animation. Now the sense of all of these actions would be cleared later on in this video when you see this in action, but we need to have a couple of things. So let's start with the idle scene. Now I have provided the sprite sheet in the description below, so be sure to check that out. So now I want to add some sprite frames. So I'll do this, I'll click on this add frames from sprite sheet, click on this, I'll go into the sprites and I'll select the idle animation. Now vertically I have 1 and horizontally I have I think around 18. So we would have this. Now what I'll do is I'll zoom out pressing Ctrl and scroll down, and I can select all of these frames by dragging the mouse over it, and I'll say that add 18 frames. Now see this, we have a character, and if I press this play button, you see our character is actually moving. Now this speed is quite slow, so I'll change this to 15 frames per second, and this is good. And what I could do is I can slow this down as well. Yeah, 15 was good. See, our character is now actually moving. Now the thing is, it's not exactly centered in our screen. So what I would do is I'll take this player and drag it to the center above the x-axis to the best of my abilities. And now you see the character is more or less in the center, and this is good enough. But if you see, this character is a bit blurred. It's not clear as it should be, because this is a pixel art. What you need to do is go to project settings, and in this general tab go to textures, and for default texture filter you change this to nearest, and when you see this, now your player is far more clear. Now I can close this, and yep, we're good to go. So if I save this, and what I would do is update the collision shape as well. Let's update this so that it fits the player properly. Drag this down And doing this properly is very crucial for your game that you would be making, because this depends on how good your character would be colliding with other entities in your game. So yeah, this is good enough for me. I'll press save, and when I press the play button in this level, see, I am seeing this player. I can move left, I can move right, I can jump, but this player is not moving. So what is the issue here? The issue is we want this animation to be played whenever the scene is instantiated. So for that, you need to press this autoplay on load. So when you do that and then you press play, your player would actually be moving. Now it's not that visible, so I'll close this and I'll go to this level scene, and for this camera I'll just change the zoom value to 5, so the camera is this big with respect to the player. Press save, and if you press run again, now you can see your character in the scene. I can go right, I can go left, I can jump, right, and I can also fall off the screen. Okay, so let's close this, and we have a good base to go ahead. I'll go to this player scene, and let's also add the run animation. So for this, I'll click on run, and make sure to have this looping selected in this idle as well. That is very important. So in this run, I will click again on this adding sprite frames and press on run. I have, I think, vertical 1 and horizontal 24 frames. Yep. And I'll press Control or Command and scroll down using the wheel in my mouse, and I can select all of these and add 24 frames. Now if I press play here, you see our player is now actually running. Now I can change this to, I think, 18 frames per second. See, and if I press enter, this is running well. If I do it to 15, the player is quite slow, so 18 is good enough. So our player is actually running at 18 frames per second. Okay, we have the run animation, we have the idle animation, but we don't have to press this autoplay on load, because if you do that, your player would be running from the start of the scene itself. Okay, I'll press save, and what I would do is I'll go back to this idle animation and I'll press on this pause, so that we don't actually do the animation or play the animation while I'm making this game. Okay, now we want to control that through the code itself. So let's go to this player script, and I'll click on this distraction free mode, and what I want is to create a new function. It would handle the animation, so handle animation, and this would be returning a void type, and let's this pass for the moment. Now we want to ask the question, when is the character running or standing idle? So the character is running or standing idle only when it is on the floor. So what I could do is, if is on floor, I can update the animation here. Now we want to update the animation through the code itself, right? We want to update the animation through the code. So for that, I'll just close this, and what I would do is create a new variable. So var AnimatedSprite, and this would be this AnimatedSprite. So what I would do is I would click on this and drag it to this cursor. So I would have this, and now using this variable, I can actually control what animation is being played. Okay, now the problem is that, or the Godot is complaining. Why? Because the thing is, it is saying that use at onReady. So the logic is, when you're trying to get access to this child node of this player, it is not able to do so. Why? Because whenever you are instantiating a scene, first this player node would be instantiated, and then the remaining children would be instantiated. So when you instantiate the player, you would instantiate the script with it, and when you're calling this script, right, when you're trying to run the script, the thing is, this animated sprite is not yet being made. So this node does not exist till now when you're trying to access this right now. So for that, I'll press at, or for this, what you could do is type at onReady, and this would stop throwing the error. Now what is happening is, when you add this at onReady, what this would do is you would get this variable instantiated to this when all of the nodes are instantiated. Now if it is on floor, what I want is to know if it is moving or not. So if, or let's just remove this comment, if velocity. So if there is any movement along any direction and it is on floor, what I want is to play the I can play glide, idle, jump, or run. So if there is a velocity, I want to play the running animation. Otherwise, what I would like to have is the idle animation. Now if I run this, you would see some things. So I can run and this is not doing anything, but I can still move and this is playing the idle animation. So let's see what is the issue. The issue is we are not calling this handle animation in the physics process, so it's never being updated. So I can call handle animation, and now if I run this, if I move, I would play the running animation. As you could see, if I go left, it's still playing the running animation, and if I don't move, it's playing the idle animation. Okay, now you would have seen one issue. The player is always looking towards the right. Now we need to handle that. Now the way to handle this is basically two ways, and I would use the way which is more complicated, but this is something that is going to be very easy if you do it from the start while making the game. So function, and I need to handle the direction, or what? I need to handle the direction, right? And again, this would return a void type and just pass. What I want is to not flip when the character is going right and flip the character when it is going left. So what I could do is I can just say I can get this animated sprite and dot flip h is equal to true or false. But when do we want this? We want this if our velocity x direction is actually less than 0. That means I want to flip this character, and elif, that means else if velocity is greater than 0. In that case, animated sprite dot flip h should be false. So let's save this, and there's an error. Okay, so velocity dot x, and let's have some space in between. Save this and I run this. You would see this is working almost correctly. I can go right, but if I go left, nothing is happening because we are never calling this handle direction function. Now if I save this, if I run this, and if I go left, it is actually going left. If I stop, it is playing the idle animation. If I go right, it's moving right, and this is fine. But there is an issue with the collision shape, and the flipping is not exactly perfect, because if I press left, the player is actually moving a bit towards the right. So what is the issue? The issue is with the way this is actually flipping the animated sprite. So if you go to this 2D and you see this sprite is placed like this and the center is this. So when you press flip, this is flipping about this axis. So that is why your player moves towards the right and the collision shape is on the left when you try to move left. Now to correct this, you can just select this, update the pivot point, and just update this. Click on this, drag this to the center of the player. See, this is in the center. Zoom in, still in the center, and yep, this should work, but this won't. So again, we are still seeing the same issue. So the thing is, the flipping is still happening using that same pivot point. Now to mitigate this solution, I'll go into the script, and rather than flipping in the edge, what I would do is actually I would update the scale in the x direction as -1, and similarly I would do the same thing on the bottom panel or the bottom elif statement, and this would be 1. Now if I play this and if I run this, this would be working correctly. See, there is no issue. I can go left, I can go right, I can jump, I can go left, and so that's it for the handling the direction. We have handling the animation, and we have the physics process. Now we need to figure out a way to actually do the jumping animation. That is very simple. We'll go to AnimatedSprite, and first let's save this player. AnimatedSprite, go to sprite frames, and in this jump I can just add that jump animation. This is what vertically I have 1 sprite, and horizontally I think I have about 19. Okay, and for this would actually have some issues, but let's go with this, and let's just select all of them and add 19 frames. If I go to 2D and if I run this, the player is actually trying to jump. Now for this, I would increase the speed to about 15 again, right? And I'll save this. And what I would do is now I need to tell this script that you need to play this jump animation when we are actually not on the floor. And before that, you don't need the looping animation in this, because you see, once you jump, you don't need to jump again until and unless the player asks you to jump. So I'll just close this and this would stop at the end. Okay, now let's go to the script and we need to handle the animation. And what do we want? So if this is on floor, you'd play the running and the idle animation. Otherwise, if it is not on floor, I want AnimatedSprite to play this jump animation. And I can just save this, and I don't actually need to do anything in the physics process. And if I press play, you would actually see going left and right. And if I jump, I have the jumping animation. See, I can jump and this goes beyond the screen. So you might think we are done, but we are actually not. There's a big problem, and that would only be visible if I go to this camera 2D, and for position smoothing I would disable it. And now if I run this, you would see nothing happening in this, right? There's no issue in this, but the issue arises when you actually jump off a cliff. And if I jump, see, since I'm in the air and I'm falling down, it is assuming that we are actually jumping, or what I'm seeing is that the animation is still looping. And what I want is my jumping animation to extend as long as I'm in the air. And this is where the glide animation comes into the picture. Okay, so I'll close this Alt F4. I'll go to this player scene, AnimatedSprite 2D, and in this, what I would be doing is I would be removing this 8 to 18 frames by selecting this and delete, and we would have something like this. If I save this and if I run this, you would see some change. So if I jump, it is just again looping the same animation, which is now even shorter in length. But now what we want is to add the glide animation as well. For this, what I would be doing is again going to Sprite 2D, and in the glide animation I would want this to loop, and I would add the jump frames itself. And if I zoom out and select all of them, or like this, and if I add all these 19 frames, and we don't actually want to use all of them, what we want is this 9th, 10th and 11th. So what I'll do is I'll take from 12 to 18, I'll delete that. From 1 to 8, I'll delete that. And this is something that we would be seeing. Now if I play this, yeah, this is in a way gliding. And if I increase the frames per second to 15, you can see this is actually in a way gliding. Now what I want is to make this animation a bit smoother. This is something that you don't have to do. I will select this, I'll copy this, I'll paste this here, and I'll select this, I'll copy this, and I'll paste this after. Okay, so I'll copy this and I'll paste this after this 3rd frame. So now you see this is a bit smoother, and I can press save. And in the script, when do you actually play the jumping animation and when would you play the gliding animation? So when you would be playing, so if velocity dot y, the velocity in y direction, is actually less than 0, that means you're trying to go up. So in that case, you would play the jump animation. Otherwise, what you would do is you would actually play the glide animation. And if I save this, and now if I run this, see, when you're jumping, it would show you, okay, so I can go left, I can go right, I can jump, and the jumping animation is also working correctly. And now if I skydive, see, the player would be jumping throughout. That is about the player animation. Now in this level scene, what I would like to do is to add I would like to add some environment so that you can actually see this player moving in action. Welcome back. So now I have created a tile map so that you can actually see the player moving and running around. I can jump, and I can jump, I can glide as well. The gliding animation is also working. Everything is working. I can go left, right, and yep, that's it. So you can add more enemies, more players, coins, a lot of stuff, and this is actually looking pretty well.